Gunshots echo like thunder through the Montana hills, piercing the dawn silence. Smoke rises thick against a burning horizon, where shadows move like ghosts, merciless and relentless. A woman stands alone on the edge of chaos, eyes narrowed, heart pounding like distant war drums. In her hands, a secret worth millions. In her path, betrayal carved deep as the valleys around her. She knows trust is scarce, friends scarcer, and enemies always closer than they appear. A quiet voice inside warns her she might not make it out alive this time, but her grip tightens, determined, because in this forgotten corner of the world, beneath worthless dirt and broken dreams, she's finally found something worth fighting for, and someone else wants it bad enough to kill. Rebecca Alvarez still remembered the day she signed the founding papers for Alvarez Keene Mining Group with her late husband, Thomas Alvarez. It had been 25 years ago in a cramped lawyer's office that reeked of stale coffee and ambition. Back then, she was a decorated geologist with the Army Corps of Engineers, recently retired and brimming with confidence. Thomas, a passionate environmental scientist with a keen sense of community responsibility, had said the world needed smarter ways to extract resources, ways that didn't destroy local lands. Their vision was clear. They wanted to open mines that balanced profit with sustainability, and they would do it together, hand in hand. But all that changed when Thomas died unexpectedly of a heart attack 2 years prior, leaving Rebecca in a spiraling haze of grief. In her absence, she let Thomas's younger brother, Charles Keene, take the reins as interim CEO. At first, Charles's help was a relief, a smooth talker who could keep investors calm while she mourned. But what started as a temporary arrangement slowly morphed into something else. Charles became more secretive. He expanded operations in ways Thomas would have hated. Whenever Rebecca questioned him, he'd remind her that the board was looking to push older leadership into retirement. If she wasn't careful, she'd find herself ousted altogether. That was enough to make her quiet for a while. Then came the so-called transfer. Officially, it was a courtesy sending Rebecca to salvage the Elk Hollow branch in Montana, a sleepy little operation rumored to be on the verge of bankruptcy. Unofficially, she knew it was a demotion. One chilly fall morning, she found the transfer papers neatly folded on her desk at the Seattle headquarters. Elk Hollow was pinned on the company map with a red tack labeled high risk. It hadn't turned a profit in nearly 5 years. Rumors flew that the mine was nearly exhausted. Charles framed it as an act of faith. "You're the only one with the expertise to see if it can be saved," he'd told her, leaning back in his plush leather chair like he was bestowing a gift. But the smirk on his face felt more like a warning than a compliment. Rebecca considered refusing, but something tugged at her memory. Thomas once mentioned there was more to Elk Hollow than the data suggested. He had flagged odd geological readings, but the file was never followed up on. Maybe it was a wild goose chase, or maybe there was something deeper. In the end, she signed the transfer. Pride wouldn't allow her to back down from a challenge. If Elk Hollow truly was worthless, she could confirm it and then come back to the board with real answers. If it held hidden treasure, she would prove her worth to the company and to the memory of her late husband. As she pulled out of the Seattle garage that afternoon, her SUV packed with personal documents and a single suitcase, Rebecca felt a pang of sorrow. This wasn't how she had pictured continuing Thomas's legacy, but if it was a fight Charles wanted, she'd give him one. She drove straight through Washington into Idaho, then cut into Montana's endless horizon, the day's light fading behind craggy mountain silhouettes. The journey brought back hazy recollections of her Army deployment days, crossing rough terrain under less than ideal circumstances. She had faced worse conditions than this, though never entirely alone, and never with a target on her back from someone who was supposed to be family. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, Charles's assistant reminding her to send updates, board members forwarding best wishes, and a cryptic text from an unlisted number that read, "Be careful who you trust." Rebecca frowned at that last one, glancing in her rearview mirror as if expecting to see a phantom car tailing her. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary, but the uneasy feeling in her stomach refused to ease. Just when she thought the drive was uneventful, a battered pickup truck sped past her on a remote stretch of road. She caught a fleeting glimpse of the driver's face, a scar running across his cheek, eyes flickering with recognition. He slowed down in front of her, almost daring her to pass. Heart pounding, Rebecca tried to remain calm. She was used to high-stakes situations, but out here, there was no backup, no phone reception, and no quick rescue. In an attempt to keep her distance, she braked slightly, letting the truck pull further ahead. But then the truck swerved abruptly, blocking the road entirely. Rebecca had no choice but to stop. The driver got out, leaving his engine running. He was a broad, rough-looking man, perhaps in his mid-50s, wearing a muddy baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. Another man hopped off the passenger side, similarly built, carrying something that looked suspiciously like a crowbar. The first man knocked on her window, a menacing grin stretching his mouth. "Roads closed. Lady," he sneered, his voice dripping with false politeness. Rebecca had trained for confrontation in the military, but that was decades ago, and she wasn't armed. She took a steadying breath, recalling her husband's advice, lead with calm. Survive first, fight only if there's no other way. She cracked the window slightly, enough to speak. "What seems to be the problem?" "Problem. We heard you might be the new boss lady for Elk Hollow." The second man smirked, tapping the crowbar on his palm. "We don't like visitors who poke around where they're not wanted." It dawned on her that this wasn't a random mugging. These two clearly knew who she was, whether they worked for a competitor or for Charles, or were just local troublemakers wanting to scare her off. She wasn't sure. Fear twisted in her gut, but Rebecca refused to show it. She forced a smile and reached for the radio she kept under the console. If she could bluff them into thinking she had direct contact with state troopers nearby, maybe they would back off. "If there's a problem, I can call for assistance," she said, pressing the radio's talk button. Even though it wasn't transmitting, there was no signal. Her gamble paid off, or at least partially. The man with the scar scowled, glancing nervously at the radio. "We ain't got time to be messing with no cops," he growled. He jerked his head at his partner, who took a step forward, crowbar still resting against his shoulder. For a heartbeat, Rebecca thought the man would swing it into her windshield. Instead, he lowered it slowly, an unpleasant grin crossing his features. "We'll see you later, Ms. Alvarez." Then, just as abruptly as they appeared, they jumped back into their truck, revved the engine, and sped off into the dusk. Rebecca sat there, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. She took a moment to compose herself, inhaling until her lungs felt ready to burst. Fear was a predator that thrived on panic. She reminded herself. She'd gotten out of this confrontation with nothing more than a scare, but the message was clear. Stay away. Though they hadn't hurt her physically, the psychological effect was potent. This was more than an idle threat. Either these men had local interests in Elk Hollow, or they were paid to harass her. In any case, they were warning her off the moment she crossed into Montana. The road was open now, but her mind was racing. She fiddled with her phone again, trying to get a bar of reception. No luck. She could either go back to the nearest town or push forward. Going back felt like giving in. So she pressed forward. Night wrapped the landscape in a cloak of eerie quiet. Rebecca eventually reached the flickering neon sign of a motel, the Timberline Rest, on the outskirts of a small town called Pine Bend. She was still a good 2 hours from Elk Hollow's main facility, and fatigue weighed on her like a lead blanket. The motel looked like something out of a 1970s travel brochure chipped paint, a broken ice machine outside, and flickering bulbs that spelled out only half the name, but it was a place to regroup. She parked around the side, making sure to keep her car in view from any room window she might get. The desk clerk, an older woman named Doris, greeted her with a polite smile and offered the local special a single queen bed, no frills. Rebecca took it without haggling. She asked if Doris had seen a pickup truck with two men that evening, describing them briefly, but Doris shook her head. "Haven't seen anyone come through in hours," the clerk said, tapping her long nails on the counter. "This isn't exactly a busy spot." With her key in hand, Rebecca walked to her room, the night air biting her cheeks. She double-checked the door lock and used the chain. Once inside, she slid off her coat and stared at the reflection in the mirror, a 48-year-old widow with more stress lines than she'd had 2 years ago, eyes still sharp but carrying the weight of heartbreak. She tried to calm her rattled nerves. This was only the beginning, and already she was dealing with intimidation tactics. She planned to file a report with local law enforcement first thing in the morning. When dawn broke, Rebecca grabbed a quick coffee at the motel lobby and set off again toward Elk Hollow. The morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and lavender, momentarily lifting her spirits. She had always loved the rugged beauty of Montana. Even if her mission here was overshadowed by corporate politics, she allowed herself a moment of appreciation for the wild, open country. After an hour of weaving through pine-studded valleys, she spotted a small sign marking the entrance to the Elk Hollow mining facility. The place looked quiet, too quiet. Where she expected to see trucks hauling ore or workers milling about, she saw only a skeletal staff of about a dozen vehicles in the lot. A chain-link fence encircled the property, topped with barbed wire. The guard gate was unmanned, and the security booth window was cracked. She pulled up to a small administrative building, which was a weathered two-story structure with a sagging porch. Inside, she was greeted by an older receptionist named Wilma, who seemed genuinely startled to see a visitor. When Rebecca introduced herself as the new director, Wilma's face lit up in relief. "We've been expecting somebody from Seattle for months," she said. "They kept sending interim managers, but none stayed longer than a few weeks." Rebecca offered Wilma a friendly smile. "Well, I plan on doing more than just passing through," she replied. Wilma escorted her down a dim hallway lined with outdated safety posters to a cramped office that apparently belonged to the last manager. The walls were bare except for a single dusty plaque that read Excellence in Resource Management, 2008. A battered metal desk sat against the wall, and a filing cabinet leaned precariously in the corner. Rebecca surveyed the space, mentally noting she'd have to bring in better lighting and perhaps some fresh paint. Just as she was about to ask Wilma for a rundown of the current operational metrics, a tall, lanky man with silver hair stepped in. He wore a hard hat tucked under his arm and introduced himself as Tim Connors, the site safety officer. Safety officer, project manager, HR liaison, whatever's needed, he said with a shrug, an air of resignation in his voice. "We've all been doubling up on roles ever since the cutbacks." She shook his hand, surprised by how calloused it felt. Clearly, Tim was not an office-bound employee. "You have time to give me a brief tour?" she asked. Tim glanced at Wilma, then back at Rebecca. "Ma'am, I'd love to, but I should warn you, morale around here is at an all-time low. We've lost over half our staff." The ones left are worried they'll be next. Rebecca nodded. All the more reason for me to see exactly what we're dealing with, she replied. She grabbed a hard hat from a hook on the wall, her old training kicking in. She liked to observe conditions on site before diving into paperwork. Tim, show me everything. The facility was a sprawling patchwork of aging equipment, rusting conveyor belts, and storage areas that looked abandoned. A single bucket wheel excavator stood silent against the skyline, its massive arm pointing skyward as if accusing the heavens for its neglect. Tim led her past half-empty tool sheds and leaky water tanks, explaining how the site used to employ nearly 200 people at its peak. Now, barely 30 remained, most on part-time or rotating schedules. As they walked, Rebecca's trained eye noted multiple safety hazards, uneven walkways, unsecured overhead beams, and insufficient lighting in critical areas. She remembered her years in the Army Corps, where she oversaw engineering units that would have been appalled by these conditions. But it wasn't just safety infractions that bothered her, it was the evident despair. She passed a group of workers huddled near a crane, their faces etched with worry. When Rebecca greeted them, they offered polite nods but avoided eye contact, as though they'd already decided this new boss lady was just another corporate stooge. Tim took her to the geological survey lab next a converted shipping container with minimal equipment. There, she met Nadia Shah, a geologist who looked too young to have endured so much hardship. Dark circles hung under her eyes as she glanced up from a microscope. Rebecca introduced herself, but Nadia seemed cautious. We've had 4 different managers in 2 years, Nadia said, not unkindly. Most of them never even bothered coming out here. Rebecca felt a pang of shame on behalf of the organization. I'm here now, she said, determined. Show me the data you're working on. Nadia pulled up some drilling reports, and Rebecca's brow furrowed. The sampling logs were inconsistent. Certain areas had thorough data, others had almost no data at all. A large portion of the site's northeastern quadrant seemed barely surveyed. Nadia pointed to that on a map. It's weird, she explained. We used to gather more samples there, but then corporate told us to focus on other sectors. Corporate told you, Rebecca echoed. Nadia only shrugged. I don't have a name. It came down the chain from Seattle, so I followed instructions. That nagging memory surfaced in Rebecca's mind. Thomas once mentioned suspicious anomalies in old core samples from the Elk Hollow region. She'd never read the full report because it vanished after his death filed away. Perhaps deliberately. Nadia, do you have the earliest data from, say, 8 or 9 years ago? She asked. Nadia shook her head. We've only got digital records going back 5 years. Everything older is in storage, I think, or maybe archived in Seattle. Tim cleared his throat. We can check the physical archives, but they're a mess. The last few managers didn't want to invest in reorganizing. Rebecca nodded, deciding that would be her next step. As they stepped out of the container, a sudden gust of chilly wind swept through the yard. She noticed a tall figure in a dark jacket standing at a distance, near one of the empty storage sheds. The figure turned away before she could see a face, disappearing around a corner. Instinct sent a ripple of unease through her. This place already felt haunted by secrets. Late that afternoon, Rebecca settled into her new office, if it could be called that. The old manager's space was cramped, the overhead light flickering ominously. She asked Wilma to pull any archived files on geological surveys prior to 5 years ago. Wilma promised to check the basement storage, but warned it was a swamp of old boxes and mislabeled binders. Before diving into the clutter, Rebecca opened her laptop to connect with Seattle. The connection was spotty, but eventually Charles's face appeared on the screen for a scheduled video call. He wasted no time with pleasantries. So, how's our little money pit? He sneered, folding his hands in front of his chin. Behind him, Rebecca could see the sleek conference room at the Seattle headquarters' glass walls. Modern furniture, a stark contrast to the peeling paint she sat in. She composed her features, refusing to let him see even a hint of vulnerability. Facilities are in rough shape, workforce morale is low, and record keeping is disorganized. She summarized professionally, but I see potential here. With proper investment, we might turn it around. Charles let out a mocking laugh. Investment? Are you kidding me? That place is hemorrhaging money. The board wants it shut down by the end of the quarter unless you can present a miracle. Rebecca's heart thudded. You gave me the impression I had more time. You've got 90 days, tops, Charles replied smoothly. And if you can't swing it, we're offloading it. Some private buyer might be interested in the land. She narrowed her eyes. And how exactly does this buyer plan to profit from worthless land? Charles smiled, steepling his fingers. That's hardly your concern. Dear sister-in-law, focus on your job. Extract a shred of value or shut it down. Those are your marching orders. When the call ended, Rebecca was left with a bitter taste in her mouth. So that was the game, give her an impossible deadline, assume she'd fail, and then quietly sell the land. She suspected Charles had orchestrated something behind the scenes, possibly involving that northeastern quadrant. She had no proof yet, but the puzzle pieces were beginning to align in her mind. Outside the window, dusk began to fall, turning the sky a bruise-colored purple. The overhead fluorescent flickered again, as though the building itself were warning her. Before calling it a day, she decided to do a quick check of the basement archive where Wilma had gone. She grabbed a flashlight and trudged down creaking stairs that led to a basement hallway. Each step smelled of mold and dust. The archive room was no better, towering metal shelves crammed with boxes. Rebecca found Wilma, sweating and kneeling over a half-opened crate of file folders. This is from 2012 to 2015, Wilma muttered, wiping her brow. Does that help? Rebecca crouched beside her, rummaging through labels. She found a folder marked Alvarez Keene Geological Surveys, Elk Hollow, 810 years old. Her pulse quickened. When she pulled it open, though, the pages inside were incomplete, some blank placeholders, some random pages referencing different sites entirely. Most had entire sections blacked out, as though redacted. She felt the hairs on her neck stand up. Someone had deliberately tampered with these records. Rebecca thanked Wilma for her help and told her to head home. It was already past normal quitting time, and the basement's musty air was making both of them cough. Determined to find something concrete, Rebecca stayed behind. She piled the questionable files on a nearby table, flipping through each page by the beam of her flashlight. Because the basement's overhead light kept flickering ominously, it was painstaking work every few pages. She'd find a vague reference to vein expansion or anomalous core sample, only to see the rest blacked out. Her mind raced with possibilities. Who would go through this much trouble to hide geological data that was nearly a decade old? If Elk Hollow was truly worthless, why bother tampering with these records at all? As she focused on a partially redacted page, the silence was interrupted by a sudden noise, a metallic clang echoing from somewhere deeper in the basement. She froze, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. Slowly, she rose and aimed the flashlight toward the door. "Hello," she called, voice echoing off the concrete walls. No answer. Another clang, closer this time. Her mind flashed back to the confrontation on the road. Were those men brazen enough to come into the facility? She realized she was alone. No security guard in sight, and no immediate way to call for help. Summoning her courage, she moved into the hallway, carefully shining the beam of light ahead. Dust motes danced in the stale air. She turned a corner and nearly stumbled over a pile of old metal shelving that had collapsed. For a moment, she thought that was the source of the noise. But then she heard something else, a soft scraping sound, as if someone were shifting crates. She caught a glimpse of a silhouette at the far end of the hallway, hunched over a box, rummaging. Her flashlight flicked across the figure's back, and he turned sharply. She only caught a flash of his face, a young man, maybe mid-30s, with wire-rimmed glasses. He bolted away, disappearing around the corner before she could say a word. "Hey, stop!" she shouted, her voice echoing. She ran down the hallway, but by the time she reached the corner, the man was gone. No footsteps, no slamming door. It was as if he'd melted into the basement's shadows. Rebecca scanned the floor, trying to see if he'd dropped anything. Nothing. Whoever he was, he'd known exactly how to vanish. Shaken, she returned to the main archive room, half expecting the boxes she'd left to be gone or destroyed. But they were untouched, except for one folder that had been moved, Elk Hollow Preliminary Evaluations. She flipped it open, more redactions, except for a single note in the margin, check NE quadrant, possible high yield. Her heart thundered. Confirmation that something valuable lay there. She decided enough was enough. Gathering the folder, she headed upstairs, locking the basement door behind her. She might not have ironclad proof yet, but she had a direction, the northeastern quadrant. Tomorrow, she'd take Tim and Nadia out there for a field survey, if only to see with her own eyes what corporate was trying to hide. The next morning, with coffee in hand and a new sense of purpose, Rebecca gathered Tim and Nadia for an impromptu meeting. They convened in the break room, which doubled as a briefing space. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, a perpetual annoyance that nobody had fixed. Tim leaned against a vending machine that had been out of order for months, while Nadia sat at a small round table, flipping through her notes. I found enough in the archives to suspect Elk Hollow's northeastern quadrant is far from depleted. Rebecca began, trying to keep her voice calm but urgent. "Nadia, can you confirm any recent samples taken from there?" Nadia shook her head. "We haven't surveyed that quadrant seriously in years. The orders from Seattle always prioritize the central pit." She paused, eyes narrowed. "But if there's something there, it could explain why production has stalled. Maybe they wanted the mine to seem worthless so they could sell it under the radar." Tim removed his hard hat and ran a hand through his silver hair. "That's one theory," he said quietly, though his tone suggested he believed it. "We've seen strange decisions from corporate before, but never outright sabotage." Rebecca handed them the folder with the partially redacted note. "Ben, we're dealing with sabotage, all right? Or, at the very least, deception. I need you both to help me do a direct survey of that quadrant today, quietly. No big announcements that might tip off anyone else." Both Tim and Nadia agreed, though a flicker of concern crossed Nadia's face. "We don't exactly have the best gear, and if management from Seattle finds out—" "That's exactly why we're doing it now," Rebecca interrupted. "Before the rumor mill starts churning, I'll handle Seattle." They headed to the equipment shed to gather basic drilling tools and sampling kits. Tim arranged for a battered old company Jeep to drive them out to the site. As they climbed into the vehicle, Rebecca took a quick look around. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. She remembered the shadowy figure from yesterday and the ominous presence of those men on the road. 15 minutes later, they were bumping along a dusty trail, the Jeep rocking over ruts and loose gravel. The northeastern quadrant was accessible only by a winding road that had seen better days. Overgrowth of shrubs and small pines indicated it hadn't been used in a long time. They passed a rusted sign that read, "Hazard Unstable Ground," but Tim mentioned it was posted years ago and never removed. When they finally reached a rocky outcropping, Nadia hopped out first, scanning the terrain with her practiced eye. The strata here could definitely host valuable minerals. she said, pointing to layers of sediment that were half exposed. Tim began unloading the portable drill. Rebecca took out a camera to document everything. She'd planned for a quick survey, just enough to confirm anomalies, but the moment Tim started the portable drill, a thunderous crack echoed through the hillside. Rocks tumbled from an overhang, crashing onto the narrow road behind them, blocking the path. Dust billowed everywhere. Earthquake, Nadia coughed, eyes wide. No, Rebecca said, teeth clenched. That was set off by something else. Within seconds, they realized someone had deliberately triggered a rock slide. The hillside above them still quivered, pebbles cascading in a mini avalanche. Tim shut off the drill, and Nadia scrambled to higher ground for a better vantage. Rebecca rushed to the Jeep, only to find the road completely blocked by massive boulders. There was no way to drive out. "Everyone all right?" she shouted over the rumble. Tim nodded, though he looked shaken. Nadia slid back down. "I'm okay," she panted, "but the entire pass is sealed. We're stuck." Rebecca scanned their surroundings. They could hike back, but it would take hours to circle around to the main site by foot, and that was if they could find a safe path. She pulled out her phone, no signal. Tim checked his radio, but all he got was static. They were effectively cut off from the facility. "This can't be an accident," Tim said, voice tight with anger. "Who would do this?" Rebecca thought of the men in the pickup, the figure in the basement, the suspiciously missing geological data. "Someone who wants us to leave that quadrant alone," she replied. "They likely set charges or use some method to destabilize the rocks. We need to get out of here and report this." Nadia frowned. "We could try climbing over, but that's dangerous if the hillside is still unstable, without skipping a beat." Rebecca rummaged through the Jeep's compartment for flares, rope, or anything useful. She found a single coil of rope and a small first aid kit. "We might not have a choice. Staying here is even riskier." Tim took a deep breath. Gathering himself, "There's an old maintenance trail up the ridge, used by survey teams a long time ago," he said. "If we can reach that, it might connect to the main road, but we'll have to climb to get there." So they began their slow, painstaking trek up the rocky slope. The dust from the slide hung thick in the air, and every footstep sent smaller rocks tumbling. They stayed close, with Tim leading the way, rope in hand to help stabilize Nadia and Rebecca. It was grueling work. The autumn sun, though not scorching, still beat down on their backs. After almost 40 minutes of scrambling, they reached a narrow ledge. From there, Tim pointed to a faint path winding around the far side of the hill. The vantage gave them a clear view of the site below, empty, silent, with no sign of rescue, but it also gave them a clue perched on a distant ridge. They spotted a man holding something like binoculars. He was watching them. "There," Nadia hissed, pointing. The man, noticing them looking back, disappeared behind a rocky outcrop. Rebecca's stomach churned. This was an orchestrated trap. Someone wanted them blocked off from the rest of the facility. She exchanged a determined glance with Tim and Nadia. "We keep moving," she said. "We can't let them scare us off, and we can't stay stranded." By the time Rebecca, Tim, and Nadia finally reappeared at the Elk Hollow Administrative Building later that evening, they were covered in dust and dried sweat. Wilma nearly dropped her mug of coffee when she saw them trudging through the door. "Good heavens, we were worried sick," she exclaimed, setting her mug down with a clatter. "We tried to radio, but no one answered." Rebecca took a seat in the lobby, feeling every muscle in her body ache. She glanced at Tim, who was leaning against the wall, breathing heavily. Nadia looked equally exhausted. "We got caught in a rock slide," Rebecca explained succinctly. "Any chance someone radioed you about that?" Wilma blinked, confused. "No, we haven't heard a peep. We assumed you were just out surveying." She paused, then bit her lip. Actually, there was a call from Seattle. Some man named Jason Wynn said he was Charles Keene's assistant and wanted to verify your location. Rebecca exchanged a meaningful look with Tim and Nadia. Jason Wynn, she'd heard the name in passing. The new personal assistant Charles had hired a few months ago. Why would he be checking on her? Perhaps he was the one feeding information back to Charles. Wilma, can you ask him to call back in an hour? I need to gather some facts first, Rebecca said, standing up despite her trembling legs. She gestured for Tim and Nadia to follow her into her makeshift office. Inside, she closed the door and let out a shaky exhale. So, we confirmed someone deliberately triggered that slide. We also spotted a man watching us from the ridge. She glanced at Tim. Any cameras or security around that quadrant? He shook his head. Security's minimal. Most cameras are either broken or never installed. That entire area was considered low priority. Nadia sank into a chair, pushing her dusty hair off her forehead. And we still don't have any legitimate samples from the quadrant. We got interrupted the moment we tried. Rebecca paced the cramped office. That's no coincidence. They don't want us to discover what's really there. She paused, recalling the glimpses of tampered files in the basement. We need a new strategy. If we can't safely drill on site, maybe we can gather older samples that might still be stored here, or cross-reference with any data we can find from external labs. Maybe Thomas forwarded data to a third party before he died. A heavy silence settled over them. Rebecca's thoughts flickered to her late husband, his curiosity about Elk Hollow. Had he suspected something? If so, how deep did it go? And why hadn't he confronted it while he was alive? Tim cleared his throat. I'm game for any plan, but we need to watch our backs. This is more dangerous than I thought. Nadia nodded in agreement. If they can trigger a rock slide, they can do other things. We should loop in the local authorities. Rebecca considered that. I agree, but we'll need to be discreet. For all we know, Charles has connections here. She glanced at the time on her phone. Jason Wynn would be calling soon. No doubt fishing for details. They had to be careful about what they revealed and to whom. They spent the next hour scouring the facility for any records that might help. Tim tracked down old internal memos on a dusty computer in the resource management office, while Nadia combed through a half-forgotten lab storage area, checking for sample jars that might still have data labels. Rebecca bounced between them, offering direction and scribbling notes in a small spiral notebook. Despite their efforts, they found very little that explicitly mentioned the northeastern quadrant. Most documents had generic references like Site B, low yield, or Zone 3 reevaluation postponed. It was as if a methodical hand had combed through everything, removing any specifics that would raise suspicion. Eventually, Wilma popped her head in, announcing that Jason Wynn was on the line. Rebecca took a steadying breath and picked up the call on speaker, motioning for Tim and Nadia to stay quiet. Rebecca, came an overly polite male voice. So good to finally connect. Charles asked me to check in and see if you needed any assistance. Assistance, Rebecca echoed, keeping her tone neutral. Yes, we heard you were doing some field surveys. Charles wanted to ensure you have the support you need. The board is, of course, quite interested in your progress. Some might say, impatient. His words dripped with corporate courtesy, but Rebecca could sense an undercurrent of condescension. She managed a polite laugh. Well, Elk Hollow is a bit more complicated than expected. Jason, we've run into some, logistical challenges. Indeed, I see. Logistical challenges are bound to happen with a failing branch, he replied smoothly. Anything I can relay to Charles? Any big discoveries, or are we looking at a dead end? Rebecca shot a look at Tim and Nadia, then answered, no definitive conclusions yet. We're still gathering data. I'll have a preliminary report soon. Jason paused. Good to hear. Just remember, the board wants a decision quickly salvage or sell. Let's not drag this out, shall we? A flash of anger flared within her, but she reined it in. Understood, she said curtly, ending the call. She stared at the phone for a moment, clenching her jaw. What a snake, Tim muttered under his breath. Nadia nodded. He's probably the one funneling info to Charles about everything we do. I wouldn't be surprised if he's also coordinating with whoever set that rock slide. Rebecca set her notebook down. We'll keep him in the dark as much as possible. Meanwhile, let's gather enough proof to show the board that Elk Hollow has hidden value. That'll buy us leverage. And Mendibayes. Though frustration simmered, Rebecca felt a surge of determination. She would not let Charles or Jason bully her into quitting. The memory of those two men on the road and the rock slide near disaster reminded her just how high the stakes were. If she backed down, Elk Hollow would be sold off, the workers would lose their jobs, and the truth would remain buried along with any potential fortune. After a quick dinner from the vending machine, stale crackers, and a candy bar, Rebecca insisted they make one final sweep of the building before calling it a night. Tim and Nadia were dead tired but rallied behind her. The place was eerily quiet, with most employees already gone home. They checked the basement archives again, this time focusing on financial statements rather than purely geological data. If there was a hidden reason to understate Elk Hollow's value, it might show up in the budgets or operational expenses. Tim found a lockbox labeled Capital Investments, and after rummaging for the key in an old drawer, they pried it open. Inside were old contracts, including some letterheads from a company called Black Ridge Developers. That's interesting, Tim remarked, flipping through the papers. Black Ridge Developers is known for swooping into small towns and buying up land on the cheap, then flipping it for big profit. They're rumored to have ties to less than reputable practices. Rebecca frowned. Could be who Charles has in mind for buying Elk Hollow. But what's their angle? Nadia pointed to a clause in one of the contracts. They have a special interest in the area adjacent to Elk Hollow's northeastern boundary. That's extremely specific. Her heart hammered. This confirmed her suspicions the northeastern quadrant might connect to something beyond the mine's official boundary. Perhaps a richer vein extended off-site, or there was another resource altogether. We need to figure out if Thomas had discovered anything about that boundary. Maybe he believed that area was more valuable than the rest of the mine combined. They continued searching the lockbox and found a partially completed letter from Thomas dated a month before his death. It mentioned expansions in Montana and the importance of verifying certain geological anomalies. Unfortunately, crucial details were missing, as though someone had torn out pages or withheld attachments. Rebecca's eyes stung. She felt a wave of grief mixing with anger. Thomas had been on the verge of revealing something big. She gently placed the letter aside, swallowing the lump in her throat. Nadia and Tim both looked at her with empathy. They knew how personal this was for her. Before they could delve deeper, a clatter from the hallway made them all jump. Tim grabbed a metal flashlight, bracing for trouble. Ayom. Rebecca peered out the door, but found only a cleaning cart knocked over, bottles of cleaning fluid rolling across the floor. The night janitor, a startled older gentleman named Luis, apologized profusely, saying he'd just slipped. They breathed a collective sigh of relief, no lurking saboteur this time. Still, the atmosphere remained charged with tension. They had discovered enough to confirm a conspiracy. Elk Hollow wasn't worthless, and powerful interests were at play. Tomorrow, they would push even harder. But for now, exhaustion claimed them. Rebecca locked the basement door, ensuring the newly found papers were hidden away in her office safe. A sense of unease followed her as she left the facility. reminding her that darkness didn't only exist outside. In the night, it was coiled deep within the corridors of Alvarez Keen Mining Group itself. That night, she returned to the Timberline Rest Motel in Pine Bend, having decided she'd stay there until she could find a more permanent living arrangement closer to the mine. The idea of driving that lonely road every evening was daunting, but she had no immediate choice. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by nightmares of rock slides and shadowy figures. She woke up in a cold sweat around 3:00 a.m., unable to drift back to sleep. In the pale glow of the motel lamp, she rummaged through her old army duffel bag, pulling out a small leather-bound journal Thomas had once gifted her. She flipped through pages of personal notes and memories, occasionally pausing at a pressed flower or a scribbled doodle he'd drawn for her. At the back was a folded paper titled Elk Hollow Observations. It listed cryptic bullet points like anomaly number 4, possible partner needed for expansion, and check chemical composition palladium. Her breath caught. Palladium was a rare and expensive metal used in electronics, automotive catalytic converters, and more. If Elk Hollow held even a modest deposit of palladium, that would be worth a fortune, more than enough to justify a secret sale to a shady developer, and more than enough motive for sabotage and cover-ups. She spent the next couple of hours comparing Thomas's bullet points with her own notes about the northeastern quadrant. There was a pattern: all references to potential high-value ore correlated with that region. She recalled hearing rumors years ago that palladium might exist in small pockets across Montana, but it had never been confirmed. If Thomas had found it, that would explain everything. By dawn, she was more convinced than ever that Elk Hollow sat on a hidden lode of palladium. She just needed solid evidence. That would require deeper core samples, specialized testing, and absolute secrecy until she could present her findings to the board. If Charles got wind of it, he'd accelerate his plan to sell or sabotage her efforts. Feeling both invigorated and anxious, she dressed in a fresh blouse and jeans, laced up her sturdy boots, and headed out. The morning sky was a soft pink, the distant mountains silhouetted in tranquil beauty, belying the tension she felt inside. She threw her duffel into the SUV, took a quick swig of motel coffee, and hit the road. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Time's running out. Sell or save. Decide wisely. A chill crawled up her spine. She refused to respond. Instead, she tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and drove with grim determination, as if outrunning the threat simmering behind the phone's screen. Today would be a turning point, she told herself. She'd either find a way to confirm the palladium deposit or realize she'd pinned false hopes on an incomplete theory. But her gut told her she wasn't wrong. Thomas had rarely been wrong either. And that was the thought that kept her going. When Rebecca arrived at Elk Hollow, she found Tim and Nadia waiting for her near the admin building entrance. They both looked energized, apparently. Her fervor was infectious. Tim lifted a set of keys, announcing that he'd managed to find an old but functional drilling rig stored in a secondary garage. He had spent half the night repairing its hydraulic lines. "It's not top of the line," he admitted, "but it should get us a decent core sample if we can transport it safely to the northeast quadrant." Nadia nodded. "I've also arranged for a private courier service to take any samples we get directly to an independent lab in Boise. No sense letting the Seattle office handle it. They'd bury it or twist the results." Rebecca smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Perfect. We'll do this quietly. I want as few people as possible knowing what we're up to. We tell everyone else we're just doing routine checks for compliance." Tim, however, had a concern. "We still have the issue of potential sabotage. The rock slide was no fluke, and if we try to haul a drilling rig to that area, whoever's watching will definitely notice." Rebecca exhaled. We'll have to be strategic. Maybe we don't go by the main path. There could be a back road or a route that's not common knowledge. Tim agreed. I know a service route that branches off from the old pipeline road. It's rough, but we might get the rig through. We should probably do it at dawn tomorrow. Minimize the chance of being spotted. That left them the rest of the day to prepare. Rebecca spent hours reviewing safety protocols and sorting through leftover equipment in the warehouse. She found harnesses, blasting mats, and other remnants of a more prosperous era. Meanwhile, Nadia checked the facility's old logs for any mention of palladium. She discovered a single line in a 10-year-old memo that stated, "Trace amounts of PD found further exploration pending." As evening approached, the trio reconvened in Rebecca's office. Wilma had gone home early, leaving them alone in the quiet building. They mapped out their route to the northeastern quadrant, deciding on an early start around 4:30 a.m. to avoid prying eyes. To further cloak their intentions, Tim would tell the skeleton night shift crew that they were testing new rig settings near the main pit. Just before they were about to pack up, Tim's radio crackled an unusual occurrence since the facility's radio traffic was minimal at this hour. A voice came through, distorted by static sight, intrusion, main gate, suspicious vehicle. Nadia and Rebecca looked at each other, alarmed. Tim grabbed the radio. Repeat, please. Who's at the main gate static? Then a brief snippet. Black, truck, occupant, armed. Without hesitation, they rushed outside. The main gate was a short walk from the admin building, down a dimly lit road. As they approached, they saw headlights piercing the darkness. A black pickup truck idled near the locked gate, engine rumbling ominously. A lone security guard was standing to one side, looking unsure. Rebecca slowed to a cautious pace. Her mind flashed back to the men who had threatened her on the road. Tim whispered, "Stay behind me." But she shook her head. If this was the same pair, she needed to show strength. Under the harsh glare of the truck's headlights, Rebecca recognized the silhouette of the scar-faced man from her earlier confrontation. He leaned out of the driver's window, eyes cold and calculating. His partner, the crowbar-wielding thug, was nowhere in sight, at least not visible. The security guard appeared to be unarmed and out of his depth. Tim gestured for the guard to step away, which he did with visible relief. Rebecca took a deep breath and approached, stopping a safe distance from the truck. "This is private property," she called, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "State your business." The scar-faced man smiled crookedly. "We heard a rumor you folks were shutting down soon. Thought we might poke around for scrap metal before you clear out." Tim shot Rebecca a sidelong glance. Nobody pokes around for scrap metal at 8 o'clock at night with a potential weapon in hand. "We're not shut down," Tim said firmly. "You need to leave." A tense silence fell, broken only by the truck's growling engine. The man seemed to weigh his options, drumming fingers on the steering wheel. Then, as if on cue, a figure emerged from the passenger side, his partner. He had a rifle slung over his shoulder, not overtly pointed at anyone, but the message was clear. The security guard instinctively backed up, fumbling for his radio. Rebecca's pulse skyrocketed. This wasn't a simple scare tactic anymore. They were armed, and it seemed orchestrated. She thought of calling the sheriff, but phone signals were notoriously weak here at night. Tim stepped forward, gripping a heavy wrench he'd picked up from the maintenance bay. "We're not interested in a fight," Tim said in a carefully measured tone, "but you're trespassing, and we will defend ourselves if we have to." The passenger exchanged a glance with the driver, then spat on the ground. "Yeah, well, we got business here, and we ain't leaving without it." Rebecca clenched her fists, 1,000 thoughts racing. Could they be after document survey equipment, or was this yet another warning? She recalled the text message, "Time's running out." sell or save. Maybe these thugs were the enforcers, ensuring she chose to sell. She stepped forward, forcing calm into her voice. I don't know who you're working for, but you're not going to strong-arm us. She tried to muster the same steel she'd felt in her army days, that unflappable demeanor in the face of danger. The passenger smirked, shifting the rifle slightly. Lady, you got no idea what we're capable of. In her periphery, Rebecca noticed movement, Nadia creeping closer along the fence line. Nadia might be trying to circle around behind the truck. If they could trap these two or scare them off, the facility might regain some measure of security. Tim, noticing the same, lifted the wrench just a fraction higher. The tension was razor thin. Finally, as if making a decision, the driver gunned the engine. The passenger hopped back in, and the truck sped off, tires screeching, sending gravel flying. It was abrupt enough to leave them all blinking in the cloud of dust. By the time their headlights disappeared down the unlit highway, the echoes of their threat remained. Rebecca exhaled shakily. They had avoided a direct confrontation this time, but the threat was escalating, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. As she and Tim helped the security guard steady his nerves, Nadia walked up, chest heaving from her short sprint. They're not just punks, she said breathlessly. I saw them take photos of the entrance. This is a warning, but also recon. Rebecca couldn't agree more. She glanced at Tim, who nodded grimly. Tomorrow, she said in a low voice, we go forward with the plan no matter what. The next morning arrived shrouded in a pre-dawn chill. Exactly as planned, Rebecca, Tim, and Nadia met behind the warehouse where the old drilling rig awaited them. They'd spent the early hours loading it onto a flatbed truck and securing it with heavy chains, mindful of every squeak of metal in the silence. A single floodlight cast long, eerie shadows on the gravel as they worked. Neither the security guard nor any night shift workers were around. Tim had arranged for them to patrol the opposite side of the property, keeping them conveniently out of earshot. They set out at 4:30 a.m., with Tim driving the flatbed and Nadia following behind in a battered pickup to carry extra drilling supplies. Rebecca sat in the cab with Tim, cradling a thermos of coffee like a lifeline. She scanned the perimeter anxiously, recalling the armed men at the gate the night before. Let's just hope they're not waiting for us somewhere on this road, she muttered, sipping the bitter liquid. Tim steered toward the old service road, a winding path used decades ago to transport pipeline segments. According to facility schematics, it would skirt around the hillside and approach the northeastern quadrant from behind, bypassing the spot where the rock slide had occurred. The route was rough and overgrown, with branches scraping the sides of the truck. More than once, the rig rattled precariously, forcing them to slow down to a crawl. Finally, after nearly an hour of navigating uneven terrain, they reached a modest clearing. Dawn lightened the horizon, revealing a ridgeline to their left and the rolling foothills to their right. This is close enough, Tim announced, cutting the engine. We'll offload the rig and walk it the rest of the way so we don't risk a second rock slide from the vibrations. The three of them hopped out, the crisp air stinging their faces. Nadia jogged to the pickup and grabbed the survey kit handheld scanners, core sample tubes, and a smaller portable drill just in case. Rebecca slid on a harness and tool belt, her heart racing. She couldn't shake the feeling they were trespassing on forbidden ground. But this was her facility, her project. If anyone was trespassing, it was the saboteurs who wanted Elk Hollow silent. They offloaded the rig with cautious efficiency, each movement rehearsed to avoid loud clangs or mechanical whines. It was an older model, painted olive drab like something once used by the military. A few test rotations of its drill head assured them it still functioned. Tim wiped sweat from his brow, despite the morning chill. Here goes, he muttered, maneuvering the rig deeper into the clearing until they found a level patch of ground. Rebecca unfolded a detailed geological map. "Based on the partial data we have," she said, tapping the area near the boundary line, "there should be a significant anomaly around 100 yards north of here. We'll start with a shallow test drill. If the initial core shows high readings of palladium or other precious metals, we'll go deeper." Nadia nodded, already powering up a handheld scanner. "Let's do this quickly. If someone's watching, they'll figure out where we are soon enough." Tim turned the ignition on the rig, and the diesel engine rumbled to life. The rhythmic clack of machinery filled the air, echoing off the hillside. Rebecca inhaled the cold morning air, heart hammering. This moment held the potential to change everything for Elk Hollow, for the company, and for her own redemption. The drill bit chewed into the earth with a steady growl, sending vibrations up through the rig's metal frame. Nadia monitored the progress using a handheld gauge, which displayed real-time feedback on soil density. Despite the rig's age, it performed admirably, slicing through topsoil and into the harder rock strata below. Rebecca hovered, scribbling notes each time Nadia called out the depth. 10 feet, 15, 20. At 30 feet, the drill encountered resistance that caused the engine to strain. Tim adjusted the feed rate, and the rig resumed its downward push. All the while, the three of them exchanged uneasy glances, expecting at any moment to hear the boom of a sabotaged explosion or see dust clouds from another deliberate rock slide. But none came. At 35 feet, Tim called a pause and retracted the bit, carefully extracting the core sample. Nadia donned latex gloves, her hands trembling slightly with excitement as she transferred the cylindrical sample into a lined tray. Rebecca joined her, turning on a small pin light to inspect the rock layers. Her breath caught when she spotted a faint silvery sheen embedded among darker veins. Nadia let out a gasp. That, that looks like palladium." She touched the speckled layers with a fingertip, eyes wide in disbelief. "If so, that's a huge find. We'll need lab confirmation." But Rebecca's heart soared. The pieces of Thomas's cryptic notes flashed through her mind. "Let's label this sample A," she murmured, fighting to keep her voice calm. "We'll do one more test hole to confirm. Then we get these samples out of here." They drilled again 15 yards away, repeating the process. This time, at around 30 feet, the bit hit something that made Tim's eyes widen an especially hard vein. The rig shuddered and nearly stalled. "That could be good or bad," he muttered, halting the drill to switch to a more robust bit. After a tense few minutes, the rig continued. When they extracted the second core, the metallic streaks were even more pronounced, weaving through the rock. Nadia struggled to contain her excitement. "I've never seen a deposit this concentrated outside of specialized mines in Africa or Russia," she whispered, as if the ground itself were listening. Rebecca felt a rush of vindication. Charles had almost succeeded in labeling Elk Hollow worthless. If these cores were truly high in palladium, the site's value could skyrocket overnight. She couldn't wait to see the look on his face when she presented her findings. But first, she had to ensure the samples made it safely to the lab. They carefully packed both cores into separate metal cylinders, sealing them with tamper-evident tape. Nadia loaded them into a foam-lined case. Tim powered down the rig, and they prepared to load it back onto the flatbed. The entire operation had taken just under 2 hours, impossibly fast for a standard survey, but they'd improvised well. Just as they started hauling equipment back toward the vehicles, Nadia's scanner beeped, alerting her to movement on the far side of the clearing. She spun around, reading the display. "We're not alone," she warned, voice tight. "Someone's coming." They all froze. The crackle of brush and snapping of twigs echoed from beyond the tree line. too far to see clearly but close enough to confirm approaching footsteps. Instinctively, Tim switched off the rig's engine, plunging them into a sudden hush, interrupted only by the rustling wind. Nadia crouched behind the front of the flatbed, while Rebecca ducked behind the rig, heart pounding. A figure emerged from the pines, a tall man wearing a hooded jacket, carrying what looked like a hunting rifle. He paused at the edge of the clearing, scanning the area. Rebecca could make out the glint of his scope in the dawning light. She swallowed hard. This was no random hunter wandering onto company property at sunrise. He moved with the cautious deliberation of someone on a mission. As if on cue, two more figures appeared behind him, similarly armed. They had the same body language as the men who had threatened her on the road and at the gate. She glimpsed their faces briefly, not the scar-faced driver, but definitely the same menacing aura. They whispered among themselves, pointing in the direction of the rig. Rebecca motioned silently for Tim and Nadia to stay low. Her mind raced. If these men discovered the fresh drill holes or the core samples, it could lead to a violent confrontation. She glanced at the case containing the valuable samples, which Nadia had hidden inside the truck's cab. They had to protect that at all costs. The trio of intruders inched closer, spreading out in a semicircle. Rebecca's pulse hammered in her ears. She considered making a run for it, but the path back to their vehicles was partially exposed. If these men were quick on the trigger, it could end badly. Instead, she gestured for Tim to move along the side of the rig, hoping he could circle around behind the intruders. Tim nodded, gripping a heavy wrench as his makeshift weapon. Nadia clung to the side of the flatbed, her breath ragged. She had no weapon but looked ready to fight if cornered. Rebecca silently cursed the fact that they had no real security detail, no official backup. She clenched her jaw, reminding herself that she'd survived worse in her army days, but she also recalled that she was no longer in her 20s. The first man raised a hand, signaling to the others. He pointed toward the freshly drilled holes in the ground. Through the crack between the rig's supports, Rebecca could see them stepping over, rifles angled at the dirt as if checking for signs of sabotage or new activity. One of them knelt, running his fingers across the disturbed earth. Suddenly, Nadia's scanner beeped again. The sound pierced the quiet like a siren. All three men spun toward the noise. Nadia dove flat, pressing the scanner against her chest to muffle it. But it was too late. A shout rang out a harsh, guttural command. The men fanned out, now fully alert and sweeping the area with their rifle barrels. Rebecca's stomach twisted in knots. Their cover was blown. She locked eyes with Nadia, who mouthed, "Sorry." Rebecca gave her a reassuring nod, even as her mind scrambled for an escape plan. Perhaps Tim was in position by now. A sharp crack shattered the silence, a shot fired into the air. The muzzle flash came from one of the intruders, who aimed skyward like a warning. Rebecca winced at the ringing in her ears. The echo reverberated off the trees, amplifying the tension. "Come out!" Now, a voice bellowed, voice trembling with aggression. "We know you're here." Rebecca glanced around desperately. Tim was nowhere in sight. Nadia cowered beside the flatbed's tire, her face pale. Another shot rang out, this time burying itself in the ground a few yards from the rig. The message was clear, they weren't bluffing. Steeling herself, Rebecca rose slowly, hands raised to shoulder height. "Stop shooting," she yelled, stepping out so they could see her. A swirl of fear churned in her gut, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "You'll get someone killed." The three men snapped their focus onto her. One kept his rifle trained on her, while the second moved forward. She recognized the sneer on his face from the confrontation at the facility gate. The third man hung back, scanning the tree line as if anticipating Tim's ambush. The second man approached within a few feet, rifle half lowered. You just don't listen, do you? He growled, pointing at the drill holes. We told you to stay away from this area. Nadia emerged from behind the truck, hands also raised. We're not doing anything illegal. This is our company's property. She tried to keep her voice calm, but it quavered with fear. The man spat on the ground. Your property? That's cute. This land's being sold. Or hadn't you heard? His lip curled. You're messing up a perfectly good arrangement. Rebecca felt her pulse spike. So it was exactly as she feared these men were working for someone who wanted to secure Elk Hollow cheaply. We're not selling, she said firmly, though her voice shook slightly. This land is far more valuable than any of you realize. A bitter laugh erupted from him. We realize it just fine, ma'am. Question is, do you want to walk away in one piece, or do you want to be carried out? Before she could respond, a clang echoed from behind the intruders. Tim stepped out from behind a mossy boulder, wrench in hand. We've called the cops, he lied, his voice dripping with bravado. They'll be here any minute. All three men spun, rifles snapping up. A heartbeat passed where no one breathed. Rebecca prayed Tim wouldn't do anything rash. The standoff felt impossibly tense. Any trigger finger twitch could set off a hail of bullets. Finally, the first man swore under his breath. He jerked his head, and they began to back away, rifles still aimed. You got lucky today. Next time, there won't be a warning shot. The men retreated into the pines, never fully turning their backs. Within seconds, they were swallowed by the dense foliage. A collective exhale shuddered through Rebecca, Nadia, and Tim. They collapsed against the truck's frame, adrenaline still coursing. That was too close. Nadia whispered, her hands trembling. Rebecca nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. They couldn't afford any more near misses. This was escalating faster than she'd feared. With the armed men presumably gone, the trio wasted no time. They packed the drilling rig back onto the flatbed, double-checked the precious core samples, and fired up the vehicles. Rebecca took the lead in Nadia's pickup this time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every rustle of branches or crunch of gravel made her heart jump. She half expected another ambush around each bend of the service road. Still, they made it back to the facility without further incident, though by then the sun was well above the horizon and the skeleton crew on site was beginning to stir. Tim guided the flatbed behind a cluster of storage sheds, out of plain view. Meanwhile, Nadia clutched the foam-lined case with the core samples, refusing to let it out of her sight. They hustled into Rebecca's office, where she locked the door behind them. Nadia set the case on the desk and opened it carefully. Even in the fluorescent light, the streaks of metal embedded in the rock glimmered. We need to get this to the lab ASAP, Nadia said, pulling out her phone to schedule a courier. Tim wiped a sheen of sweat from his forehead. Despite the air conditioning, those men, they knew exactly where we'd be. Someone must be feeding them updates. He looked at Rebecca, his voice tinged with suspicion. Could be someone in Seattle, or maybe someone right here in Elk Hollow. Rebecca thought of the figure in the basement archives and the repeated intrusions. I wouldn't rule out a local informant, she murmured. Someone with access to schedules, resource requests. We have to be extremely careful. Just then, Wilma knocked on the door, sounding both concerned and excited. There's a phone call for you. Says he's your courier from Pine Bend Delivery, wanting directions on where to pick up a package. Nadia had apparently set everything in motion. Perfect. Wilma, please patch him through, Rebecca replied, forcing a businesslike tone. She turned to Nadia. Let's make sure they pick it up at a neutral spot off-site. I don't want them seeing the actual condition of the mine or risking an intercept here. Nadia relayed instructions to meet in a grocery store parking lot in Pine Bend. Once the courier arrived, they would hand over the samples in exchange for an express flight to a certified lab in Boise. Tim offered to drive there with Nadia, providing an extra layer of security. Rebecca was about to agree when her desk phone rang an internal line. I'm so sorry. She picked up, half expecting Jason Wynn's oily voice. Instead, it was the front gate guard. Ms. Alvarez, we have some visitors from corporate security. They say they were sent by Mr. Keene. She shot Tim and Nadia a sharp look. Corporate security Charles never mentioned this. Something about the timing felt off, like an immediate attempt to seize control. Tell them I'll be right there, she said, hanging up, turning to Tim. She instructed, you and Nadia go. Handle the courier. Don't let anyone else see those samples. She jotted a quick note detailing the chain of custody she wanted them to follow. Then she placed a reassuring hand on Nadia's shoulder. We're close to proving it. Nadia, take no risks. Nadia nodded, zipping the case shut. Tim grabbed it and the two hurried out, leaving Rebecca alone to deal with Charles's so-called corporate security. She steadied herself with a deep breath. If Charles was trying to muscle in, she'd be ready. Rebecca made her way to the front gate, stepping into a scene that felt more like a private military checkpoint than a corporate facility. Two black SUVs with tinted windows were parked side by side, their engines idling. Four men in dark suits and sunglasses stood at parade rest. Each wore an earpiece and had the bearing of ex-military or private contractors. As she approached, one of the men stepped forward. He was tall, with a neatly trimmed beard and a gaze that flicked around the yard as if assessing threats. Ms. Alvarez, he asked politely, extending a business card. I'm Director Marcus Reed, Head of Security Solutions contracted by Mr. Charles Keene. We're here to assist. She took the card, scanning it briefly. Marcus Reed. Is it? Something about the name needled her memory. She recalled reading about a Reed in the older Elk Hollow contracts. She forced a neutral expression. Mr. Keene never informed me of any hired security. Care to explain the sudden arrival? Reed offered a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. We have reason to believe there have been hostile incidents here, trespassers, possible armed confrontations. Mr. Keene wants to ensure your safety and the safety of the facility's assets. Convenient timing, Rebecca replied, crossing her arms. She eyed the other men, who were already surveying the perimeter. We have local security measures in place, plus the sheriff's office is just a call away. Reed inclined his head. I understand, ma'am, but Alvarez Keene is a large corporation, and Mr. Keene is concerned that local resources might not be sufficient. We have specialized training for these kinds of threats. She found her patience wearing thin. All right, if you're legitimate, let's go to my office and discuss protocols. But my staff and I run this site, not you. Reed bowed his head slightly. Of course. Miss Alvarez, we're here to serve. She led them across the yard, her mind spinning. If these men were truly under Charles's orders, that meant Charles was either trying to protect an asset he thought valuable or lock down any discovery she might make, possibly both. She didn't trust them for a second, especially since she'd seen references to Marcus Reed in some questionable documents. Once inside the admin building, she took them to a small conference room, not wanting them anywhere near her personal office or the basement archives. One of the men remained outside, presumably standing guard. The others sat around the table, while Reed removed his sunglasses. First, Rebecca began, refusing to sit. Let's clarify the chain of command. I'm the senior director on site. You answer to me no unauthorized movements without my approval. Reed smiled thinly. Understood. We'll coordinate everything through you. Second, your presence is strictly for perimeter security, not operational interference. I don't want you questioning my employees or seizing property. Agreed. Reed replied, though something in his tone suggested he was only humoring her. Rebecca forced a smile. Glad we're on the same page. Now, let's see your credentials and any documentation from Mr. Keene authorizing your presence. Reed handed over a thin dossier of papers stamped with the Alvarez Keene letterhead and Charles Keene's signature. At first glance, they looked legitimate enough in agreement for supplementary security services due to reported threats at the Elk Hollow branch. Rebecca's pulse quickened as she read the fine print. There was a clause that granted them broad authority to secure all relevant documents and assets if they deemed it necessary for safety. That's quite a bit of power, Rebecca remarked, raising her eyebrows. Are you planning to confiscate files if you feel the need? Reed's lips curved into a carefully polite smile. I so. Only if absolutely required to protect the site and its people. Ma'am. She set the papers down, meeting his gaze. You might be disappointed. Mr. Reed, there's not much worth protecting here. At least that's what Mr. Keene has always claimed. He didn't flinch. I'm paid to ensure safety, not to assess value. Despite his diplomatic tone, Rebecca felt certain he was assessing more than just physical security. She sensed the conversation was a chess match, each of them probing for weaknesses. Very well, I'll show you the key areas, she announced. But I'm short-staffed today, so I'll ask that you don't disrupt normal operations. Reed nodded, standing up. Lead the way. She guided him and two of his men through a deliberately limited tour the break room, the main office hallway, and the outer sections of the warehouse. She avoided the basement archives, the newly discovered samples which were thankfully gone with Nadia, and any sign of the drilling rig. Wilma watched them from behind the reception desk, eyes darting nervously at the armed men. As they neared the exit, Reed paused by a bulletin board pinned with employees' photos. This must be the local staff. He traced a finger across Tim's picture. I hear Tim Connors is your second in command here. I'd like to speak with him. Rebecca stiffened. He's off-site right now, handling a delivery. You can meet him later. I see. What about the geologist, Nadia Shah? She's with Tim. Rebecca lied smoothly, maintaining a casual tone. They'll be back this afternoon or tomorrow morning. Reed nodded, lingering for a moment as if memorizing the faces. We'll wait. Then, they stepped outside into the afternoon sun. Rebecca felt a bead of sweat trickle down her back. Though the day was mild, this sudden incursion by corporate security reeked of a coordinated move. Perhaps Charles had discovered that she was unearthing the site's true value. I'm dumb. Or maybe these men had ties to the mercenaries who'd harassed her. I'll set you up with a temporary station in the old guard booth, she told them, forcing a businesslike tone. There's not much space, but it's a vantage point over the main yard. Reed flashed a brief smile. That'll be fine. We'll also do a patrol around the perimeter. Just be careful, Rebecca said pointedly, recalling the armed intruders. They're not the only ones out there. Reed gave a curt nod, and they parted ways. As she watched them head back to their SUVs, her gut twisted. She needed to warn Tim and Nadia about this development, but also keep up appearances. The labyrinth of betrayal was tightening, and she felt the walls closing in. Rebecca hurried back into her office and locked the door. Her first task was to call Tim on his cell phone, hoping he was still en route to Pine Bend. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. Feeling a stab of anxiety, she tried Nadia's number. Same result, no pickup. A pang of worry shot through her. Were they in a dead zone, or had something happened? She reminded herself that cell coverage in rural Montana could be spotty at best. She left them each a quick message. Corporate security has arrived. They're from Charles. Be cautious. Call when you can. Next, She opened her laptop and typed out a rushed email to her longtime ally on the board, a woman named Linda McVeigh, who'd been supportive of Rebecca's appointment. In carefully chosen words, she explained her suspicion that Elk Hollow contained significant palladium deposits, that sabotage was occurring, and that Charles might be involved in a covert plan to undervalue and sell the site. She attached scanned copies of the partial documents she'd unearthed. Just as she was about to hit send, an error message popped up: no internet connection. She cursed under her breath, checking the router settings. Everything seemed normal, but the DSL light blinked red. Maybe it was just a glitch. She tried her phone's hotspot, only to find it had 0 bars. A knock sounded at the door. Ms. Alvarez Wilma's voice. Marcus Reed is asking if you need help with the internet outage. He claims they can fix it if you give them admin passwords. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. That was too coincidental. She cracked the door open, staring at Wilma. Tell him I'm fine, and not to touch our network. I'll handle it. Wilma nodded, glancing nervously over her shoulder. He's standing right there. Wants to speak with you. Rebecca braced herself, stepping into the hallway. Reed stood a few feet away, phone in hand. We noticed your internet is down, he said, feigning concern. We have an IT specialist who could look into it. She shook her head. Our system's older than he is. I've got a local technician on speed dial. Thank you, though. Reed shrugged. Suit yourself. We'll be patrolling the exterior. Let us know if you change your mind. As soon as he walked away, Rebecca motioned for Wilma to follow her to the basement door. She pushed it open, flipping on the lights, leading the way down the creaking steps. Once they were alone in the archives, she whispered, We can't let them get near these documents. Understood. Wilma nodded, her face pale. Understood, Rebecca sighed. Also, if Tim or Nadia call, let me know immediately. Tell them not to come back to the facility until I give the all clear. I don't trust these security goons. Wilma agreed, though the worry in her eyes spoke volumes. Rebecca then spent the next few minutes rummaging through boxes, looking for any older modems or backup connections. If the corporate security had cut their internet, they might also sabotage phone lines. She needed a backup plan, maybe a local dial-up phone line or a satellite connection if it existed. The more she searched, the more hopeless it seemed. Charles had effectively cut her off from external communication. A tense afternoon unspooled. Reed's men split into pairs and roamed the property. Occasionally, Rebecca spotted them chatting with some of the workers, who appeared uneasy at best. Whenever she tried to approach, they'd move on, as if determined to avoid direct scrutiny. Meanwhile, the phones remained operational. She received calls from a few suppliers, but the internet stayed down. Rebecca busied herself drafting a detailed analysis of the potential palladium find on her laptop. If Tim and Nadia returned safely, she'd merge their lab results into this document. Then, whenever the network came back, or she found an alternate way to transmit data, she'd send it to Linda McVeigh and the rest of the board before Charles could intercept it. By late afternoon, her anxiety about Tim and Nadia morphed into full-blown fear. She paced her office, trying their numbers repeatedly. Voicemail, every time. Wilma popped in at one point, quietly suggesting that maybe they'd decided to lie low in Pine Bend until the security presence died down. If they had trouble with the courier, they might need more time, Wilma reasoned, though the worry in her voice betrayed how uncertain she felt. Just as Rebecca decided to drive to Pine Bend herself, her office phone rang. She snatched it up. Hello. Nadia's voice crackled on the other end. It's me, she said, panting. We're okay, but there was an incident. Rebecca's stomach sank. What happened? Are you hurt? Tim got clipped by a bullet, Nadia said, her voice trembling. He's stable, But we're at the Pine Bend clinic. Some black SUV tried to run us off the road after we dropped off the samples. Tim lost control, and they shot at our tires. Dear God, Rebecca murmured, gripping the phone so hard her knuckles turned white. Is he going to be all right? Yes, the bullet grazed his shoulder. The docs say he'll be fine, just needs stitches and rest. Nadia's voice cracked. We're safe for the moment. I called from the clinic's landline because my cell was smashed. Rebecca glanced around her office, paranoia spiking. Listen carefully. Corporate security is here. They claim they're here to help. But I don't trust them. Do not come back to Elk Hollow tonight. Stay put in Pine Bend or somewhere safe. I'll handle things here. Nadia paused. What about the samples? The courier took them. Right? Yes, they did. According to the tracking info, they're en route to Boise by air freight. Nadia confirmed. We're going to wait until Tim's released, then maybe find a motel for the night. Good, Rebecca said. Keep me posted. And if you see any suspicious vehicles, call the sheriff immediately. After they hung up, Rebecca sank into her chair, relief and anger mixing in her veins. Tim had nearly died. The price of discovering the truth about Elk Hollow was skyrocketing by the hour. She spent a few minutes collecting her thoughts, then decided enough was enough. She grabbed her jacket and marched out toward the old guard booth where Reed and his men had set up. It was time to demand answers and to see just how deep their involvement might run. If they balked, she'd contact the local sheriff, slow internet or not. She was done playing cat and mouse in her own facility. Rebecca found Reed standing by one of the SUVs, fiddling with a handheld radio. He looked up as she approached, his expression carefully blank. Two of his men lounged nearby, arms folded. I need to speak with you. Now, she said, making no effort to hide the tension in her voice. Reed raised an eyebrow. Of course. Let's step into the booth for privacy. Inside the cramped guard booth, which smelled faintly of stale coffee and old cigarettes, Rebecca wasted no time. I've just received word that two of my employees were ambushed near Pine Bend. Shots were fired, and one was injured. She locked eyes with him, searching for any flicker of guilt or surprise. I need you to explain why that might be happening if you're supposedly here to provide security. Reed's gaze remained disturbingly calm. I have no knowledge of any ambush. She crossed her arms, refusing to break eye contact. Well, I find it suspicious that your team arrives unannounced, cuts off our internet, and my employees end up getting shot at. Not to mention the armed trespassers we've encountered these past few days. He inclined his head. We didn't cut your internet, Ms. Alvarez. Our presence here is strictly to prevent further incidents, not cause them. Perhaps your employees ran afoul of some local criminals. Rebecca let out a mirthless laugh. Local criminals who conveniently drive black SUVs, the same color and style as yours. Reed remained impassive. You're making assumptions, I promise you. None of my men left this facility today. She stared at him, hating that his denial could be plausible. For all she knew, Charles had more hired goons beyond Reed's immediate team. Then maybe you should do your job and help me figure out who's behind the violence. She snapped, though her voice trembled with emotion. Reed held up his hands in a placating gesture. We'll increase our perimeter patrols and coordinate with local law enforcement if that's what you wish. But let me be clear, we are not your enemy. She wanted to retort, to accuse him further, but her chest felt tight with frustration. Just stay out of my way, she managed. I have enough to deal with. Outside, the afternoon sun had dipped behind a cluster of trees, lengthening the shadows across the gravel lot. Rebecca gazed at the horizon, weighed down by exhaustion and worry. Tim was injured, Nadia was rattled, and corporate mercenaries roamed her property. The day had spiraled into a nightmare. Ms. Alvarez. Reed called after her as she started to walk away. She turned, jaw set. For what it's worth, he said, voice low, I truly do hope your employees are safe. We'll do our best to keep the peace here. She offered no reply, simply walking back toward the admin building. The worst part was, she couldn't tell if he was lying or if he honestly believed his own script. One thing was certain, trust was in short supply, and every new player seemed to have an agenda. That evening, Rebecca made a decision she wouldn't sleep at the Timberline Rest. It was too obvious a pattern, and after Tim's ambush, she felt vulnerable following the same routine. Instead, she asked Wilma for the name of a secluded cabin rental near the lake, a place typically used by hunters in the off-season. Wilma provided the details without question, sensing that her boss needed somewhere far from prying eyes. By the time Rebecca finished a final walkthrough of the facility and left, dusk had settled, painting the sky in bands of purple and orange. She checked on the local sheriff's line of communication still open, thankfully, and made a quick call to inform them of the day's events, including the suspicious security presence. The deputy she spoke to promised to keep an eye out for suspicious vehicles around Elk Hollow, but with limited manpower, there was only so much they could do. The road to the cabin was a winding stretch of gravel, flanked by tall pines. Her SUV's headlights cut through the darkness, occasionally revealing a startled deer or a flutter of bats. She kept glancing at her rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following her. None appeared. Eventually, she reached a rustic log cabin perched on the edge of a small lake, its surface glinting in moonlight. The front porch light was on, just as Wilma had arranged. Inside, it smelled of aged wood and fireplace ash. A single bedroom, a stone hearth, and a tiny kitchen that was all, but it felt safer than anywhere else she'd been in the last week. She double-locked the door, drew the curtains, and placed a chair under the doorknob for good measure. Only then did she sink onto the worn sofa, knees weak from exhaustion. She powered up her laptop using her phone's hotspot in the faint hope of finding a signal. Miraculously, one tiny bar appeared, enough to possibly send an email. She typed quickly, attaching her preliminary analysis of Elk Hollow's potential palladium deposit. She addressed it to Linda McVeigh with a CC to two other board members she trusted marginally more than Charles. Her finger hovered over the send button. A swirl of fear rose in her gut. If this got intercepted or if Charles found out, he might shut Elk Hollow down immediately or escalate the violence. But if she didn't send it, she'd have no proof if something happened to her or the site. Gritting her teeth, she clicked send, watching the progress bar inch forward with agonizing slowness. At first, it seemed stuck. Then, after nearly a full minute, it completed. A surge of relief coursed through her. Her findings were out there. Even if Charles tried to bury them, at least a few board members would know the truth. Feeling marginally safer, she made a quick dinner from the cabin's sparse provisions, a can of soup and some crackers. Afterward, she settled by the hearth, watching the flicker of embers. The day's tension weighed on her, but for the first time in a while, she allowed a flicker of hope. The samples were on their way to a reputable lab. Tim was safe in Pine Bend, and the board was partially informed. Perhaps, just perhaps, the tide was turning. Her phone rang at 9:00 p.m., startling her. She snatched it up, expecting Tim or Nadia with an update. Instead, an unfamiliar male voice spoke in a calm monotone. Ms. Alvarez, I presume. My name is Dr. Samuel Frost from Boise Metals Analysis Lab. I have your samples. Rebecca sat up straight. Yes, Dr. Frost. Thank you for calling. How soon can you have results? There's a rush order attached to them, so I'll run an overnight analysis. He replied. Should have preliminary findings by midday tomorrow. Her heart fluttered. That's fantastic. Please call me the moment you have anything. She paused, then added, and keep this confidential. He chuckled, a raspy sound. My lab is used to corporate discretion. Rest assured, Ms. Alvarez. They ended the call, and she leaned back with a shaky sigh of relief. Tomorrow, she might finally have the hard evidence she needed to save Elk Hollow and expose Charles. She thought about calling Tim and Nadia to share the news, but decided to let Tim rest. Perhaps tomorrow would bring a measure of victory. Sleep came fitfully. Each rustle of wind against the cabin walls made her jump. She kept thinking she heard footsteps outside or the low rumble of an engine. Sometime around midnight, she rose to stoke the fireplace, then checked her phone, no messages. She dozed off again, only to wake at dawn with the uneasy feeling that she was being watched. Morning light filtered through the wooden shutters, painting the cabin's interior in warm hues. She swung her feet to the floor, rubbed her eyes, and peered through a small gap in the curtains. The lake lay calm and empty, ringed by a gentle morning fog. No black SUVs, no armed figures, nothing but the serene wilderness. She made coffee in a tin percolator on the cabin's tiny stove top, the rich aroma mingling with the woody scent of the cabin. Over the next hour, she nursed her coffee and tried Tim's phone again. Still no answer, though it rang this time before switching to voicemail. At least that meant his phone wasn't completely destroyed. By 8:00 a.m., and her nerves were on edge, waiting for Dr. Frost's call. She checked her email miraculously. The single bar of signal had vanished, leaving her offline. She debated driving into Pine Bend just to access reliable internet and see if Linda had replied, but she worried that leaving her hideaway might expose her to whoever was hunting her. After pacing the cabin for another half hour, she decided she couldn't just sit still. She threw on jeans, laced up her boots, and packed her laptop into a messenger bag. If she timed it right, she could swing by the Pine Bend clinic, check on Tim, get a decent phone signal, and hopefully hear from Dr. Frost. She opened the cabin door to a crisp fall breeze. The morning sun glinted off the lake, and for a moment, she felt almost at peace. Then she noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt driveway, next to her own. Deep treads, large, possibly an SUV. Her pulse spiked, and she scanned the area, no vehicle in sight. The tracks looked recent, though. Someone had been here, quietly circling her cabin while she slept. The drive to Pine Bend was tense, each bend in the road feeling like a potential ambush. Yet she encountered no other vehicles. When she finally reached the small town, a single main street lined with a diner, a gas station, and a handful of shops, she let out a cautious breath. She parked near the diner to get breakfast and a stronger cell signal. Inside, the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee nearly overwhelmed her. She took a booth by the window, flipping her phone to speaker as she redialed Tim's number. This time, he answered. "Becca," he said, sounding tired but lucid. "I was about to call you. We got your message." Relief spilled through her. "Tim, thank God. How are you, bruised and bandaged? But I'll live. The doc wants me to rest at least another day." "What about Nadia?" "She's fine, though seriously rattled. We stayed in a motel near the clinic. We think a black SUV might have followed us, but we lost it. Nadia's with me now, getting some coffee." Rebecca glanced around the diner, feeling a surge of empathy. "I'm at the Pine Bend Diner. Any chance you two can meet me here so we can plan next steps?" Tim hesitated. "I can barely lift my arm. But sure, Nadia can drive." "Great. Hurry, but be safe." She ended the call just as a waitress approached, offering a friendly smile. Rebecca ordered a short stack of pancakes, scrambled eggs, and coffee. As she waited, she scrolled through her phone's email signal. Here was a notch better. And indeed, there was a reply from Linda McVeigh. Her heart hammered as she read Rebecca. Your findings are alarming and important. I tried to raise the issue with the board, but Charles is pushing to vote on Elk Hollow's closure this week. He insists the branch is worthless. I suspect he's orchestrating a sale. Without concrete lab data, I can't hold off the vote much longer. Please present something official ASAP. Stay safe. Linda? A cold swirl of panic and anger twisted in her gut. That meant she had days, maybe hours, before Charles bulldozed her efforts through a board vote. The waitress delivered her food, but Rebecca barely had the appetite. She texted Dr. Frost, hoping for an update on the sample analysis. No immediate response. 20 minutes later, Nadia helped Tim hobble into the diner. His left arm was in a sling. A dark bruise marred his temple where he must have hit his head in the crash. Nadia looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. They slid into the booth across from Rebecca, exchanging weary smiles. Glad you're okay, Rebecca said, eyes flicking to Tim's bandaged shoulder. Any word on who attacked you? Tim shook his head. They never showed their faces, just ran us off the road. We told the local sheriff's deputy what happened, but we didn't get a plate number. They said they'd look into it. We all know how that goes. Nadia sighed. I just want this to end. Did you get any call from the lab? Rebecca leaned forward. Not yet. I texted Dr. Frost. We need those results to stop Charles from closing the mine. She quickly filled them in on Linda's email. Tim's jaw tightened. Nadia's hands fidgeted around her coffee mug. They plotted their next move in hushed tones over plates of pancakes and eggs. Rebecca explained about Reed's so-called security team taking over the site. Tim and Nadia exchanged troubled looks. If they're legit, they'll focus on stopping intruders, Tim said, but my gut says they're there to muzzle staff and search for any evidence of this palladium. We have to assume they'll intercept the lab results if they can. Rebecca said, once Dr. Frost calls, we need to get a formal report in the board's hands before Charles does anything drastic. Linda's going to try to delay the vote, but she can't do it alone. Nadia rubbed her temples. And if we go back to Elk Hollow, we're walking into a hornet's nest. Rebecca nodded solemnly, which is why we need to control the narrative. If we arrive with official lab results and present them directly to the board, maybe in person, in Seattle, they'll have to reconsider. Charles can't just dismiss scientific proof. Tim grimaced, shifting in his seat. I'm in no shape for a corporate showdown, but I'll back you up however I can. Just then, Rebecca's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered with a racing heart, praying it was Dr. Frost. It was Miss Alvarez, he said, sounding more animated than before. The preliminary analysis is well. Let's just say you were right. The palladium concentration in these core samples is some of the highest we've seen in North America. It's a major discovery. Rebecca felt adrenaline surge, her free hand clenching into a fist. That's incredible news. Dr. Frost, I need an official, signed report as soon as possible. I'm typing it up right now, he said. I'll email it once it's complete, and I can also fax if you have a secure line. You'll want the core samples back, I presume? Yes, but first, get me that report. This is a game changer for Elk Hollow. When she hung up, her face must have betrayed her excitement because Nadia and Tim both perked up. We have it, she whispered, voice trembling with relief. High concentration palladium, enough to justify a massive revaluation, enough to save the mine and prove Charles is up to no good. Nadia let out a small laugh of disbelief. Tim patted Rebecca's hand with his good arm. Then we don't wait. We head to Seattle, face the board in person. Exactly, Rebecca said. We'll present the data to Linda, have her gather some allies, and force an emergency session before Charles can quietly push through a sale. She slid out of the booth, practically buzzing with momentum. I'll drive to Elk Hollow and pick up whatever essential documents we have. Tim, you and Nadia can either come with me or stay here if you're not up for it. He frowned, starting to object, but Nadia spoke up. He's in no condition to fight off mercenaries if it comes to that. Let's get him checked into the bigger hospital in Missoula, or even Seattle, if that's where we're headed. Right, Tim. Reluctantly, Tim nodded. Fine, but be careful. Those men with guns won't give up easy. Rebecca tossed some cash on the table for the meal. Be ready to leave on short notice. I'll see if I can bluff my way past Reed's men. Then we make tracks for Seattle. The stakes had never felt higher. An hour later, Rebecca pulled into Elk Hollow, her mind still humming from Dr. Frost's revelation. The facility looked strangely peaceful in the midday sun, yet she sensed the tension simmering beneath. Reed's black SUVs were parked near the main admin building, but she saw no sign of the men themselves. She quickly parked by the side entrance, wanting to slip in quietly. Perhaps she could grab the physical archives, pack up her laptop, and disappear before Reed noticed. But as soon as she stepped inside, Wilma greeted her, eyes wide. "He's waiting in your office," she mouthed. Rebecca swallowed a surge of nerves. He who Marcus Reed. Tightening her jaw, Rebecca moved down the hallway, pushing open her office door. There sat Reed behind her desk, casually flipping through some files. A surge of anger flared her personal space, her papers. He looked up with a polite smile that made her skin crawl. "Ms. Alvarez," he said, standing in a mock gentlemanly gesture. "Glad you're back. We've been worried." She forced herself to remain composed. "You have no business in my office. Please step away from those files immediately." He shrugged, not moving an inch. "I'm just doing my job, ensuring the site's security. Some interesting documents you have here, old geological surveys, references to palladium deposits." Her heart pounded. So he'd found hints of her discovery. She resisted the urge to snatch the papers from him. "Those are confidential corporate documents," she said, voice tight. "You have no clearance." He raised an eyebrow. "I have all the clearance I need from Mr. Keene. You see, we're tasked with protecting any high-value assets. If Elk Hollow truly contains the metals you suspect, that puts it under our purview." She crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "I'll be bringing these files to Seattle for review by the board. Hand them over now." Reed's smile faded, replaced by a calculating stare. "I'm afraid I can't let that happen without Mr. Keene's direct authorization." Rebecca felt a flash of white-hot fury. Charles was trying to confiscate her evidence, no doubt to finalize his crooked deal. She took a slow breath, then fixed Reed with a withering glare. "Either you give me those documents, or I'll be on the phone with the sheriff in 2 minutes. Your choice?" Reed weighed her threat. After a tense moment, he set the papers down carefully. "No need for dramatics, Ms. Alvarez. We're all on the same team, right?" She gathered the files into her arms. "I'll be leaving for Seattle within the hour. I suggest you and your men pack up. There's nothing left for you here." Reed took a step forward, lowering his voice. "I wouldn't rush off if I were you. It's a long drive, and accidents happen on these remote roads." A chill spiked down her spine, but she refused to show fear. "Is that a threat?" "Just a concern," he said, stepping aside. "Drive safely." Rebecca pushed past him, heart thundering. She had the documents, the lab results were inbound, and Tim and Nadia were ready to converge in Seattle. The final showdown with Charles loomed large. As she hurried to her SUV, Reed's ominous warning echoed in her mind. She could almost taste the confrontation awaiting her in that distant boardroom, a confrontation that would decide not just Elk Hollow's fate, but her own. In the end, every battle leaves scars some you wear proudly, others buried deep within. She'd fought through the fire and darkness, reclaimed her honor, and found strength she never knew existed. But victories rarely come without cost. Trust, shattered by betrayal, never truly heals. Relationships, once cherished, become casualties left on distant battlefields. Yet, within the ashes of what was lost, she'd built something new, a life shaped by courage, forged by resilience, and guided by integrity. Now, as twilight settles softly over Montana's rugged peaks, she watches the land she saved bathed in amber and shadow. The quiet is profound, peaceful, earned. Yet memories linger, voices whispering of past doubts, of choices made and roads not taken. For every story of survival, there's always the quiet reflection afterward, wondering if everything was worth the price. And as stars slowly ignite above her, casting gentle light on the paths ahead, one question lingers in the silence. When the dust settles and you're left with only your choices, what would you have done differently?